It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Greg, really excited about today's conversation. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad because this is an old friend of yours that I have never met. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, and as we were talking pre-show, there's a little bit of a difference in your background. And I couldn't, right as you signed on, I couldn't figure out, couldn't put my finger on what it was.
Yeah.
Now we know. Getting ready for rapid growth down there, Greg White.
Well, you know, everyone has to have a New Year's resolution, and this is mine, is to remodel this this studio. Yeah.
Hey, that's probably easier than some other resolutions that I know I've sworn to. So we'll see. But today we're talking with a leadership dynamo, a published author, podcast host, that's also a very dear friend of the show. So I'm really excited to share Amir Ghannad with our audience here. So stay tuned for a wonderful discussion, Greg, that will raise and increase our community's leadership IQ, no doubt.
No doubt.
Quick programming note before we get started. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure you find and subscribe to wherever you get your podcast to Supply Chain Now so you don't miss others, because I promise you're not going to want to miss conversations just like this. So, Greg, with no further ado, let's bring in our featured guests here today. We are talking with Amir Ghannad, Leadership Development Specialist, Culture Transformation Catalyst, and founder and CEO at the Ghannad Group. Amir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you both. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, you know, this
welcome aboard.
Definitely. And Greg, this has been in the works for a while, and I'm really excited. We're overdue. You know, Amir, we've done, I think, 540, 550 episodes, and we should have easily included you in the first 10. But better late than never, and looking forward to a conversation here today.
I was really pulling for you, Amir, but
well, you know, I figured you guys needed some time to really establish yourself as a really awesome, company and podcast, which you already have done. So this way, if I screw this one up, it won't really be a big problem for you.
You're too kind. Too kind.
Look at it.
So see, Greg, Amir doesn't miss a beat. So we've got a great conversation teed up here today. But where do we want to start, Greg?
Let's start at the beginning, Amir. Tell us about your birth. No, let's start a little bit beyond that. Do tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe even a little bit about your upbringing.
Sure. Well, let me start back when my dad was about 15 years old. And no, I mean, I grew up in Iran. So sometimes people listen to my accent. I always tell them, I said, listen, 10 minutes into my conversation with you, you're going to be wondering, like, where is this guy's accent coming from? He has a Middle Eastern kind of thing going with a little Southern twang and whatnot. So I grew up in Iran. I came to the States when I was 16 years old. I came by myself, didn't know anybody, didn't know the language. Very modest sort of means, a little bit of money. But anyway, landed in Boston, Massachusetts, went to high school up there, then moved down to Georgia, went to college in Georgia, Middle Georgia College, and then transferred to Georgia Tech and got a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech. And then it went from there. Wow. Basically, my upbringing, I was the oldest child in the entire family. Like, I was the oldest grandchild. I was pampered. I just lived a really cushy life. And then I found myself in a foreign land where I didn't know anybody. Like, I was trying to fend for myself when I was 16 years old. Had a series of adventures in Boston when I first got there. Got beat up and didn't have a place to stay. And
I was going to ask about the beat up in Boston. Yeah. That seems like a given, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, the thing, I'll tell you the very short story of that. It's like, about 2 weeks after I got to the States, the high school that I went to had put all the high school students up in a dorm. that belonged to a college. Well, 2 weeks later, the college decided they didn't want the high school students there, so they kicked us all out. So here I am in the street. I'm trying to figure out where to live. So I found three other guys in the same situation. We found us an apartment. Well, two of these guys were really out of control. They were partying and all of this. The other guy and me, we were always kind of studying and all that. So those other guys told us every night, hey, why don't you guys come out with us? And after like 2 weeks, we said, okay, we'll go out with you guys one time. And we went to this game room somewhere, rode the subway and all of that. Anyway, we found ourselves in a neighborhood where they didn't really want us there. And I was the one who got beat up. Anyway, that's more than I wanted.
That's why they wanted you to come along, because if it hadn't been you, it would have been one of them.
That's right. That's right. Like if a bear's running after you,
right,
you have to be faster than the bear, right? Just be
faster than the slowest guy. That's right.
So anyway, so that's sort of my story. And once I graduated from Georgia Tech with my master's in mechanical engineering, I started with Procter and Gamble and went on from there.
Well, then, so that's a great the transition point there. Let's talk about your professional journey prior to the Ghannad Group. You know, we met back when you were doing big things and leading sites in the manufacturing world, and that was just a single chapter in the book of Amir Ghannad's professional journey. So tell us more about, you know, some of the key positions that made up your career prior to the Ghannad Group, and especially those that shaped your worldview, and then we'll touch on Eureka Moments in a minute.
Yeah. And so coming out of school, I basically started in 1985 in Albany, Georgia, with Procter and Gamble. And I had a series of assignments for about 8.5 years there. I started out as a maintenance manager. I was in operations. I had kind of a pseudo HR role at some point. It wasn't HR, it was within supply chain and within the manufacturing organization, but it was called EROD, Employee Relations Organizational Development, because very early on, I had kind of figured that was sort of my passion. And so after that, I went to Thailand and had a few assignments there. I was there for about 5 years. We started up a brand new plant, and there was just a whole lot of really great experiences there. Then we came back to the States for about 2.5 years, Dover, Delaware, then transferred back out to Germany, Frankfurt, Germany, with Procter & Gamble again. And we're there for about 2.5 years. And at that point, we came to the States again, and that is when I left P&G and joined Sunny D, and that is where we met, where I had responsibility for a couple of plants, one here in Atlanta and one in New Jersey. And then we had a series of challenges with the Atlanta plant that we kind of were dealing with, and that's where we met, and so on and so forth. And after that, I spent 4 years with Campbell Soup. Up to that point in my career, about the first 27 years, I had always worked in a plant. I've done basically just about every job in manufacturing and supply chain. But the last 4 years, I actually did organizational effectiveness work as my real job. So I was sort of an internal consultant, if you will, with Campbell Soup for 4 years. And I led the high performance work system initiative. And that was a lot of fun. And then I left to start, the Ghannad Group.
So Amir, we're going to talk about the book you did publish a little later in the interview, but I bet you could write a volume of books on all the stories and experiences you had in all those years in manufacturing, supply chain, and change. Let's go back for a second. So you spent 5 years in Thailand amongst all of your other global destinations.
Yeah.
I hope to visit that neck of the world at some point soon. But paint a picture from either a food, that you missed, you could only get it right there, or what was the coolest thing about living in Thailand?
Well, I'll tell you what, the coolest thing was we actually, it was surreal, right? I mean, from a personal perspective, we had generally two maids. One was always kind of a chef grade kind of cook, and was the sort of the main housekeeper, and then another one who kind of worked for her. We had a driver because we weren't supposed to drive, even though I snuck and did it anyway, but we had a driver. So and so we lived in this luxury apartment and ultimately on a golf course. So we lived like it was an amazing life, right? And so people were extremely nice. Food was delicious. The one thing I will tell you is there's this fruit called durian, right?
Oh,
And this durian is the king of fruit, and and the Thais themselves, they say it tastes like heaven and it smells like hell.
they aren't lying.
Right, and I absolutely love durian, and we buy it at the farmers market here, and it's an acquired taste. You either hate it or you love it. Most people hate it, but that's the one thing that I miss about as far as food is concerned.
Love it. So let's go. So all this time on this critical earlier portion of your career from Thailand, and then you mentioned Frankfurt, Germany, still with P&G.
Yeah.
What's one big memory from your time there in Germany that you still think about?
You know, something, I mean, I would say personally, I felt a sense of peace in Germany that I had never really felt. And when we first got there, you know, on Sundays, you have quiet time. You're not even supposed to work. Every place is closed. So we were sort of forced to relax, if you will. Okay. And so from a family perspective, it was family time, and it was really a wonderful time for us. We would go for long walks and things like that. The other thing, though, that I noticed was that, you know, when I was in Thailand, the style of communication was such that I couldn't really be direct with anybody. I had to really adopt a way of communicating that wouldn't leave people in a bad place, because they would lose face if we talked to them. And I don't want to stereotype, but what I'm saying is, in that culture, you sort of want to present the message in a way that doesn't leave the person in a really bad place and embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
What I found in Germany was that it was the exact opposite. If I ever sort of tried to present the message in a diplomatic way, somebody would say, well, here you go again, trying to act like, you know, you're acting like Americans, just tell us. You know, and I was like, oh, geez, you know, over here, I have to go to this extreme to make sure that I really sort of wrap the message up in something that was nice and acceptable. Over here, I had to go way to the other end and communicate very,
Yes.
very directly.
So
These two extremes really sort of showed me something about, look, you can't talk to people like you're a TV set. You got to really figure out who's listening and speak in a way that lands over there the way you intended.
Amir, I love that picture you painted. It's so important to consider these different factors when you're trying to communicate successfully and effectively, and within respecting the cultures that you find yourself in. But what you're also giving me the Eureka moment is that perhaps I'm from Thailand and Greg is from Germany, because our communication styles can be that different. So we'll have to further.
What are you
explore
saying,
that.
Scott? Just say it.
Love
We'll
it.
have to further explore that in a future episode. All right. One final thing before I turn over to Greg and we would take a deeper dive into the Ghannad group is, Amir, I can't wait for you to answer this next question. When you think of Eureka moments, especially as someone that is as introspective as you are, right? You're constantly learning. You're very aware, self-aware, and I've always admired that about you. And by the way, Greg, I meant to add this to the run of show. Amir is the kindest communicator. And Amir, I meant to say this earlier, as I recognized, or as we facilitated this interview today, and we were exchanging emails with different team members and whatnot. I have never met someone as polite in how they communicate to any, even if it's just a quick, question and response. I mean, those little things add up. So kudos, tip of the hat to you. I think the world needs more of that for sure.
Thank you so much.
Let's think about Eureka moments. What's been a key Eureka moment here, either a recent one or one years ago?
Well, I'll just share a couple of them very quickly. I mean, the first one for me was, when I first started with Procter & Gamble in Albany, Georgia. Here I am, master's degree in mechanical engineering, and they brought me in and they showed me, they introduced me to this group of folks who were now reporting to me. And I could see in their faces, right? They're looking at me like and they're all kind of looking a little rough and tough. And I'm this kid who's kind of like, I'm 23, right?
Wow.
But I look like I'm 12. And I'm standing there. I'm like, yeah, I'm these people's boss. And they're like, oh my God, this guy is going to come in and he's probably thinking he knows everything and all that. So it was kind of intimidating, right? But very quickly, before I read one leadership book, I got it that, look, my job is not to be better than these guys at what they do. My job is to actually support them and be the barrier buster for them. Somehow I got that. And it might have been because I kind of figured I was never going to be as good as they are as what they do. I don't know. So that was one moment that happened very early in my career that just kind of set the tone for everything that I did. Because people always tell me, they say, look, you spent 31 years in manufacturing supply chain, and the work you're doing is just, it's just not. I said, listen, I had this realization early in my career. And then what I did was every chance I got, every job I had, I did it from an angle of empowering people, energizing people, helping them get in touch with their best version of themselves. So that, I think, was really big for me. The other thing that I would tell you is that, you know, from a kind of a work and personal standpoint, when we were working in Germany, my wife and I had this realization that we wanted to leave and come to the States and have the kids sort of be you know, acclimated to the U.S. before when they went to you know, college here and stuff. And at that point, it was like, look, it was a big risk to leave a company that I'd been with for 19 years and not even have a job and things like that. But going through that transition and actually sticking to like what was right for us as a family and making some tough decisions from a career perspective. And I had done that a couple of other times as well. It has just really shown me that, look, you've got to make sure that your life works and everything else falls into place. Yes, success is important, but you know, so is fulfillment, and so is making sure that you've got balance in your life. So those were just a couple of moments that I will share with you here.
I think that's a really important discovery to recognize that, because I think it takes guts, and I think many people, they don't do it, right? And it's because it's a huge risk to lose your job. Your family's counting on you in a lot of ways, right? To prepare them for life, but also to support them in their life as it is today. And I think a lot of people, they really struggle with that aspect of it. It takes a tremendous amount of trust in yourself and the universe and whatever you know, opportunity exists out there to do that. I hope people recognize that.
Well said.
Thank
Very
you.
well said. Well, let's keep driving there. There's so much you know, this could be a 6-hour episode, Amir, because there's so many different things you've already shared. I'd love to know the fuller story behind, but for the sake of time, Greg, let's dive into the Ghannad Group.
Yeah, I'd love to understand a little bit about what you do. So I'm new to this understanding. I'm guessing that it has something to do with your glorious history at Procter & Gamble and Sunny D. And as I told Scott when he said we were going to interview you, he said Sunny D, and you had me at Sunny D. So tell us a little bit about what your group does.
Yeah.
So
What we do is we guide leaders in creating extraordinary cultures that results and unprecedented fulfillment, right? And I'm so sort of passionate about that because based on my own experiences, having been involved in several turnarounds in my manufacturing and supply chain experience, I'm so hooked on that. Like when leaders actually come to that point where they really get that it doesn't have to be that hard, and yes, we can make extraordinary things happen and have people be fulfilled. So I'm really committed to that. I work with my wife and 2 kids. So this is the Ghannad Group. It's a family business. And we actually started it with with my daughter sort of nudging me in that direction. In fact, my book, The Transformative Leader, was only published because she got on my case in 2015, and she had it for me saying, I'm going to publish this book someday. So I had thousands, like literally thousands of post-it notes and voice notes and all of this. And she's like, look, some of that's going to be for the next book. Now we are going to publish this book. So she took over the project and published this book in 2015, and then got on my case to leave my corporate career behind and start the Ghannad Group, which I did eventually a couple of months after she was really kind of pushing me to do it. And then she recruited her brother and her mother as well. And so what we do, Greg, is the way we do our guiding of leaders is we do leadership development, training, workshops, consulting, coaching. We've also started a membership site called On the Court, at onthecourtleadership.com. So we have all kinds of activities going on to serve leaders who want to do a better job of serving their organizations, or people who are aspiring leaders, by the way, who say, look, I want to be a leader someday, but I haven't really had any kind of training or development. So we have all kinds of things that we offer to various people, no matter where you are in that journey.
That's outstanding. So let's talk a little bit about the book. And I'm curious, did the book come first? Was I hearing that right? Did the book come first and then the Ghannad Group? Is that?
Yes, the book came first, and it was basically what the book is all about is that there's the first part of the book, the first third of the book really has to do with what I call a high commitment culture. What is a high commitment culture? Because everybody wants to be a high performance organization, right? But nobody wants to become that, because becoming a high performance organization requires work. And that work is the creation of a high commitment culture. And so I described basically the 34 different characteristics of a high commitment culture, the mindset and behavior of leaders who want to create those kinds of cultures, and a whole bunch of other things for leaders. And then the last 2/3 of the book contains really 20 one-point lessons. And these are life lessons that apply to business as well. But there's like 2 or 3 pages, each one-point lesson. And then I've got some reflection questions and suggested action to bring this into your life. And so that's the transformative leader in a nutshell.
Outstanding. So how's the book doing?
The book is doing phenomenally well. We actually have shipped it to over 30 countries ourselves. And I've also heard about other people sending pictures and all this from countries that we didn't send it to. I don't know how they got it, but anyway, so we've shipped it to over 30 countries. It's been translated to Spanish. We've got the ebook and the audiobook and all that. And what's really awesome about that is the experience of engaging with people all over the world about their takeaways and things like that. So if any of your listeners is an aspiring author, I'd say, you know what? Do it, because somebody in the world is waiting for your message. It's not about you. It's about them. You're making a difference. So jump on it, make it happen.
Love that. I gotta Greg, interject really quick before we talk about Amir's podcast. Yesterday, my whole family watched a movie called Clouds, and it was on Disney Plus. So I'm not sure if y'all have uncovered Disney Plus, but we have found it to be a wonderful resource for inspiring and great kids programming and family programming. Anyway, long story short, The Clouds is a tough movie to watch, and it focuses on a high schooler that had terminal cancer, and he had immense talent with songwriting, and unfortunately, he lost his battle with cancer as a junior or senior in high school. But before he did, he made the leap to really follow his passion on music. And to your point, Amir, there was folks were waiting to hear from he and his co-artist partner, and they were signed by a music organization. They had very popular songs, and it all culminated in the concert where, as he was struggling to perform, given how advanced his cancer got, the audience, kind of where it was his crutch to get through it. And it's a very powerful story. But to your point, it really reemphasized for the 3,000th time, maybe just in the last few months, don't wait, don't procrastinate. There's folks out there that are waiting for your gifts, and take it, put it in a headlock, and make it happen. So I appreciate the message you just shared, and didn't mean to interject too much there, Greg.
It's great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Uh-oh.
Sorry.
Okay.
You're on mute. No, I think that's a really important interjection, and I think that's a great analogy too, because I found myself sitting here going, yeah, I probably should get on that book thing.
Yes, definitely, Greg.
And no, and I think it's important to do that, to have that kind of encouragement, right? And to recognize that time is finite. So you, in addition to the services that the Ghannad Group does, you do what we do, right? You have a podcast as well. Yep. But before we jump into that, I have to ask you just one really important question.
Sure.
How many Post-it notes do you have left for the next book?
So I have to tell you honestly that when I look at the Post-it notes and the voice notes, and by the way, for the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't stopped. I mean, between me and my son, who also kind of collaborates with me in creating models and all that, we literally have thousands of voice notes and other notes and Post-it notes, electronic notes. So we are, I can tell you, I can easily publish 3 or 4 more books. We haven't really made that a priority. In fact, that is a priority for me this year in 2021 to publish that next book. But we've had so many other things that we've been working on. We said, okay, let's just capitalize on this one book and then kind of build on that. But this year, I'm going to take my own advice and go ahead and go and publish the next one.
It's hardest to take your own advice, isn't it?
It is.
Right? The cobbler's children have no shoes.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for doing that.
Thank
you. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so my podcast started out as a solo podcast. Essentially, for about 4.5 years, I published a blog post every week. So if you go to my website, there's like 200 something blog posts there, and every single week for 4.5 years, I did that. And then I started somewhere along the way saying, okay, you know what? Some people don't want to read a blog post because my blog posts are not like 2 paragraphs. They're like an ebook. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, let me just kind of do a podcast. So I started doing solo podcasts. And then before I knew it, a couple of people were asking me, they said, hey, do you accept guests? I said, yeah, sure. Why not? And then eventually it went to about 99% guest interviews because I have so many brilliant guests. I had one on yesterday by the name of Scott Luton that's going to be published here soon. And then we've had these publicists like break our door down with all kinds of really brilliant people. So I just can't. So we increased the frequency, in fact, to twice a week. Now we publish one on Monday and one on Thursday, and we still can't keep up. And the beneficiary of all of that, aside from the fact that I'm bringing some really great content to my listeners on a very sort of a selfish level, I love those podcasts because I have the interviews and I learn things and I go try and apply some of those. And then I listen to the finished product, and it's just been an amazing experience.
That's awesome.
It's been really neat to see.
As I know you guys know as well, very well.
Well, I think I love the, we talk about it all the time here, Greg, the democratic, I mean, it's such a low bar to get into podcasting and to be heard. So we love, we weren't the first by no stretch. There's probably 1 million before we started, and there's been 1 million since. And that's the beautiful thing because, there's such a low barrier to get in there and share your voice and spotlight stories. So we're been really neat to see the new voices being found. And then of course, but Amir, gosh, I think you and a podcast and podcast interviews, I mean, that you were born, to help people in their journey. So really have enjoyed your podcast, and I've read your book a couple of times. I should have grabbed it before we got on here today, but look, we're going to have to hold you accountable. 2021, I'm looking for the sequel to The Transformative Leader, right, Greg?
Yeah, that's right.
And in this case, And there's a high bar because what were we talking with Rachel Miller about sequels, Greg? Rarely are the sequels better than the first. And we were throwing a few exceptions out there, The Godfather 2 and Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. And there's a few others, but I think this would be the exception. Yes. All right. So I want to switch gears here for a moment, and I want to talk about change management. You know, certainly of all the different hats you've worn and all the initiatives you led and sites and efforts, you know, seems like to me one of the big common themes has been, you know, driving change management and helping teams and individuals and organizations embrace and you know, fight through change and get better at what they do. So let's talk about that for a minute. What are a couple of best practices that you have found to be kind of timeless best practices when it comes to, you know, effective change management?
So you know, from my book and my talks that I talk about the distinction between change and transformation, right? Transformation starts with a picture of the future that you're really excited about, and looking backwards from there, you identify the changes that you need to make that happen. But change often kind of starts with what is wrong that I need to fix. And so sometimes if you're only focusing on change, you're playing whack-a-mole with your problems, and you may not ever create a transformation. So I always say every transformation involves change, but not every change amounts to a transformation. So this is the first distinction that I want to be real clear about. Sort of, you know, Simon Sinek talks about the why and all of this, but here's the point. If you're going to make a change happen, the reason people resist change is that they don't really see the benefits as you do. Right. So it's like, you know, I love chocolate, right? And nobody has to force me to eat chocolate. I'm like, if it's there, I'll eat it. Right. But you know, there's, you know, some other things, maybe, okay, I don't love exercising, so I have to really push myself to do that. So the point is, look, how about we start with, why is it we're doing this? And what does it look like? Not just in the form of results, but in the form of, you know, what it's going to feel like to be there. And people say sometimes, you know, change takes a long time. I don't believe that. Change literally takes a few seconds. What takes a long time is actually convincing ourselves and others that we actually need to make the change, right? I mean, I changed my diet on May 4th, 1999, right? To May 5th, 1999. A drastic change in my diet. And it's been 21 years. I haven't looked back yet. And people are like, well, how did you do that? And I said, well, you know what? I had a compelling reason. My daughter was allergic to antibiotics, and she was getting it in meat and dairy. And we said, we're going to change our diet. And I never looked back. Now, you know what? If you don't really see a compelling reason, then it's going to, well, geez, I don't see myself doing that. And so for me, it's like, look, first of all, start with a picture that really, really makes a difference for people. And secondly, help them see it, help them see what's in it for them and what's in it for the broader organization. But oftentimes we try to force change upon people, and it's just an uphill battle every time.
That's right. It reminds me of the good old Whiffam, what's in it for me. And, you know, whether you're being honest and you recognize you're always, you know, as humans, you're always asking that question, or if you're being dishonest and, you know, that's not really important. It's always important, right? We're all motivated, you know, in many different ways, but also a lot of very common ways. So excellent point there. So let's talk about, and change. It's tough to do change management justice in 3 days or 3 years. I mean, you know, so I appreciate you putting in a snippet for us. Let's talk about societal change, you know, because you look back at 2020 and as we talked about yesterday a bit, that, you know, there's been not to be too dramatic about it, but there's been certainly a reckoning of sorts, and in a good way, right? I think it seems like to me, and it's tough to really generalize, but from our, you know, here, our team's really tried to help serve as a facilitator for these tough conversations, and that hopefully helps folks kind of fill in their blind spot and empathize and learn how certain societal norms and challenges impact others, right? And really see those different journeys that different folks have. And it's been as Greg can attest, it's been tough. It's been tough to hear some different experiences and try to, figure out where do we go from here. And so beyond the pandemic, there's also been a lot of unrest and tough conversations. So what are some of your thoughts when you think of a phrase like social injustice or societal change, or you name it? What are some thoughts that come to your mind, Amir?
Scott, on that front, I have to say, as you know, I have been in an interracial marriage for 39 years, a little over 39 years now. And we've lived in different places. So I've had those experiences of kind of being a minority or being considered a minority and so on. And I've experienced a lot of things that to the naked eye, may not really be real clear. That if you have not been in that situation, it may not be real clear to you that people in that situation are actually experiencing some level of prejudice or things like that. So, for me, when I worked in Albany, when my wife and I first moved there, we found a house that we wanted to buy, and we were told that that would not be a good idea because we would not be welcome in that neighborhood. And when we found that out, we went ahead and bought the house. That sort of solidified our resolve to make it happen, because we just didn't feel that was right. But years later, when we were actually getting ready to leave Albany, our house was on the market. This was now a different house. But 70% of the houses went under water because there was a flood, a 500-year flood, which, by the way, they had another one 2 years later, another 500-year flood. I don't know how that works. But anyway, so during that time, I saw a really beautiful thing happen in that society that was very much divided. And that is that people came together and working together shoulder to shoulder. It was a beautiful thing, because they no longer at that moment saw each other as, through the lens of you are different than me. Like they saw each other as brothers and fathers and mothers who were trying to sort of find shelter for their kids. And it was a beautiful thing at that moment to see that we were able to set aside our differences just to kind of come together as human beings. I think sometimes we get so caught up in our preferences, whether it's, societal kind of things, or at work even. Oh, you're in maintenance, I'm in operations, those logistics people and all this kind of stuff, to where we fail to see each other as human beings. We fail to see that deep down, we all have the same needs and desires as far as human beings are concerned. And so for me, what it comes down to is, when I have my workshops and things like that, I generally don't really talk about diversity and inclusion or anything like that. But the way I approach it is, I show the participants, through the transformative conversations that we have, we begin to see that we are so much more alike than we are different. So we set aside our differences from a function perspective, race perspective, whatever else. And once that happens, then we truly begin to appreciate our differences. This is not some kind of, oh, let's just kind of put up with this because we want to have diversity. No, it's like, when I know that you and I are truly the same, and we have, similar values and principles and things like that, then I'm like, hey, Scott, you bring something to the party, I bring something to the party, you have certain preferences, let me genuinely understand where you're coming from. And that is when we truly have that sort of, society that really works. Right now, unfortunately, we're far from it, and because we look at the world through our lens and we say, what's wrong with these people? Why do they have an issue?
Right. Great point. And so let me break it up. I love how you come at this, and I appreciate you sharing those experiences, and as well as, some of the positive change that came out from those earliest house buying days. That's some great news to hear. And, but to your last point there, we got a lot more heavy lifting to do. And, I wish I had personally speaking only for myself, I wish I had a lot more answers than I do questions, and including how to help, drive some of the change we need. That's undeniable. But, to our listeners, if I could just have one thing to encourage, really, conduct that personal inventory of this notion of subconscious bias, because I'm a big believer, just my opinion, that it exists. And I've been fortunate to have people, help me uncover and help me better understand and learn. And I think hopefully I'm a better person, and we've got a lot as a society, we got a lot more work to do, so that there's opportunity for all. But Greg, bringing you back in here for a minute before we go to get Amir to weigh in on other things global business wise that may be between his ears a bit. What any comments you'd like to add on this societal change aspect of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, of course, race is in the forefront of things now, right? But there are a lot of things that divide us. And I think just the way, Amir, you address that is really important. It's to, I've been on so many of these panels, the token white guy on these panels, right? What I've seen is that there is a great desire among people when they interact to have to gain that understanding and to show that caring, and that we need to recognize that even when everything around us is saying we're divided, it is that the people that we deal with, whoever they are very similar to us, and they want, I think in a lot of cases, they want to be understood and respected the same way any other person would. And I guess I was just raised thinking of things that way. I mean, I've experienced in a different way some of the divisions, and I think a lot of us have. But what we have to break it down into is that we're all people, and all we really want is to be able to live our lives in a productive and a satisfying way, and to be allowed and respected for doing that.
Yep. Well said. All right.
Absolutely.
There's so many things we're talking about through this episode. And again, we don't want to fool ourselves that we can, get to the epiphany in a 10-minute segment here or there. But Amir, there's so much we wanted to put in front of you and get you to weigh in on, and I appreciate you doing that. We'll have to have you back on a follow-up episode. Let's move globally. There's so much, there's so many business lessons and personal lessons to be learned in a year like 2020. When you survey, the global supply chain, global business environment, Amir, especially one with your global background, which is intriguing. I'm very jealous. What's one topic that maybe we haven't broached here today that you're tracking more than others?
The value of culture and working on culture and leadership development. Look, I know I'm biased because he who's good with the hammer sees everything as a nail. So I get that already, right? But let me tell you, in 2011, I spoke in Chicago, talking about the story of our plant turnaround. I was asked if I would present this summit with 600 people. I'd never really presented to that many people, but I had signed up to attend that session, and they found out somehow, and they said, "Hey, would you speak at this event?" I said, "Okay, yeah, sure." So I get up there and speak from the heart about the change that we made, about 13 principles that we use to actually shift our culture. And I am telling you, this talk, they had 32 speakers. And out of the 32 speakers, my talk was the number one, the highest rated by all. Now, I'm sure that had a lot to do with the fact that I am such a charismatic guy. But no, seriously, I know why that is. It was because out of the 32 speakers, there were only 2 of us talking about culture. Now, I'm happy to say that now, when I go to summits and all of this, I have, 30% of the people are talking about culture. So there is some recognition of that. But in today's world, as we think about automation and AI and so on and so forth, my message would be, let's not fool ourselves in thinking, oh, that culture stuff and all that is not going to be relevant. We're automating everything. No, first of all these people, they're going to be doing something. First of all. Secondly, if you have less people in your organization, it's even more important for them to really be in tip-top shape in terms of their ability to communicate and to work things out, to envision the future, to collaborate and things like that. So I would say that is something that could be at this point misleading people, thinking, oh, good, I'm not so good with this culture stuff. I'm so glad it's all going away because we're automating everything. No, that's not the case. It's even more important today.
Well said. And Greg, I bet you are dying to do a follow-up thought there.
Yeah, I just think the exact point, I was thinking the exact thing you said, which is as there are fewer people in an organization, the more important culture is, right? I mean, culture, look, and it has to start at the top.
Yeah.
100% of the time, I have found 100% of the time that the culture of a company comes from the person who is at the top of that company. They set the tone for the culture of that company, whether they do it consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. They are the culture of that company, because everyone frames, as you said, their hammer in search of a nail. Everyone frames their understanding of their role in the company based on that top level understanding. And it comes down, and unfortunately often gets distorted as it comes down through the layers of the company. And sometimes it gets better, but more often it gets more difficult for people as you come down the ladder in a company. So you have to be very intentional as a leader to form a positive, affirmative, and intentional culture.
Yeah, and that's so important. If I could just interject one quick thing on this, what I learned when I was working for Campbell's is that when I came in, it was like, okay, everybody was looking to me to do this leadership development for all the top leaders. And I started doing that. But then I noticed very quickly that people within the organization, frontline leaders and all those guys are like, oh man, I'm so glad you're here, because those guys really need a lot of help. And they were kind of waiting for their bosses to get a little smarter. So what I did was I launched something in parallel for the rest of the leaders to say, look, while we're working with these folks on servant leadership and their better skills and all this, here's some things that you can do. And this is what I call personal transformation. It's like recognizing that instead of doing this, you can start with yourself. So I think you're absolutely right. I think if the people at the top don't get it, it's very hard to push that boulder up that hill. And at the same time, I say to people, I said, look, no matter where you are in the organization, you can start a movement and begin to push for the right things to happen. So I think it's so important for organizations to have a multi-pronged approach, if you will, to leadership development. At the top, yes, but also within, in the middle leadership ranks and certainly on the front lines.
Well said. Speaking of things we can't tackle effectively in 10 minutes, culture
Right.
and change. But hey, this has been such a great conversation, Amir, just like I knew it would be. So I appreciate your time here today. Let's make sure that our listeners can find you and the Ghannad Group, and of course the book and the podcast. Where can folks go?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So the Ghannad Group, and I'm sure you'll have the links and the notes or whatnot. The Ghannad Group, Ghannad, is our website. But in case you don't remember my name, because Ghannad is not exactly memorable, and you're thinking, what was that guy's name? You can also go to whatwasthatguysname.com, and it will also bring you to my website. So that's one website I will mention. The other one.
Is that true?
That is true.
Wow.
Whatwasthatguysname.com. And the other one is onthecourtleadership.com. The book is The Transformative Leader, and we have it on our website. Would be glad to get in touch and, let me know if you want to, continue the dialogue on any of these topics.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
You like that URL, don't you, Greg?
It's brilliant. Both of them are brilliant, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So as much as we hate to, we're going to have to wind the conversation down at this point.
Yeah.
To our audience, hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation with Amir Ghannad as much as I have. And I've been fortunate. I've had 2 of them this week with Amir. It's been really fun. But Greg, before I wrap up and sign us off, what's one thing out of all the gold nuggets that Amir has dropped along the way, what's one thing that you think folks should really circle in a red bold marker and remember?
Well, I think the thing that stood out at me immediately was the value of a varied life and a varied career, of having lived in Albany, Georgia, of Thailand, of Germany, Iran, Boston, and everywhere in between. I think that is such a recurring theme among people who are introspective and analytical and understand the similarities and differences and celebrate both of those things among people. Celebrate the similarities, celebrate the differences among people. Because when you move a lot, and I did too as a kid, and when you move a lot, you really have no choice. And you start to see people as people whose differences you can celebrate just like their similarities, because it's fascinating to get to know people. And, I think if you think about issues in terms of people issues instead of in terms of racial issues or cultural issues or national issues, you think of them in terms of people issues, it's really helpful to be more insightful and more understanding of those things. You can see when you see someone as a person, not as a Black person or an Iranian person or a Southern person or a Midwestern person, when you see them as just a person, then you start to recognize their similarities to you, and you can celebrate their differences as well.
Well said. All right, Greg, what are you really trying to say? What are you really trying to say? No, I'm kidding.
I'll tell you what I'm really trying to say is I'm really happy to have met people from all over the world, to have been all over the world, to met people from different towns. And I think it's really, really valuable to do that. And I think the people who really can change things, who can really understand things, they don't have to have lived all over the world, but they have to have experienced the world as if they have.
Right. And they lean in to those relationships, those conversations, those events, those experiences from folks from different walks of life. So I was hearkening back to how we started this conversation.
Oh, I get
communication styles. But
that's why I went to the diplomatic approach.
Gotcha. So I'm a little bit slow on the uptake here, but hey, to our audience, hopefully you've enjoyed this wide-ranging conversation with the one and only Amir Ghannad as much as we have. Of course, as Amir mentioned, we'll have the links to the URL and some other resources in the show notes. We're after that one click, making it really easy for our listeners to engage in these awesome guests that we have here at Supply Chain Now. So you can also find, if you like this conversation, you can find a lot more like it at supplychainnow.com. You can subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from. Big thanks to Amir Ghannad, founder and CEO of the Ghannad Group. Amir, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
Thanks.
And on that note, Scott Luton and Greg White, on behalf of the whole team here at Supply Chain Now, do good, give forward, and be the change. Be like Amir Ghannad. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.